Strings. I've had this strange ability ever since I was a kid. I used to ask my parents about it, but they never seemed to see what I was talking about. No matter who I asked, they always looked at me funny and told me what an overactive imagination I had. None of them seemed to see what I could see, and I quickly learned not to bring it up. It's hard not to bring it up, though, when you're surrounded by it all the time. You see, I could see the connections between people. The people who believe me always ask what it's like, but it's honestly hard to explain. It's not really a string, but that's the closest I can come to describing it. Think of a small, colorful string that attaches you to someone else, something unbreakable that ordinary people pass through without interrupting it. I learned in high school that there were certain people I had to avoid because the number of strings attached to them would make my head hurt. There was a girl, one of the super popular girls that every high school seems to have, who almost glowed with the number of strings and cords that came off of her and moved in every direction. She was a glowing ball of reds and greens and blues and yellows and oranges, and if I looked at her for too long, I would develop the worst migraine as I tried to follow all those different strings. The different colors tell you everything you need to know about someone. The red string was for love, but it could also be for infatuation or plain old lust. In high school, I would often use these colors to tell my friends when people liked them, which kicked many of them off onto unwise relationships. Don't get me wrong, a few of them used this information to craft wonderful relationships, even marriages. But it led my friend Tyler to date a girl who went on to stalk him for years to come. Blue strings were for friendship, something that often helped me find friends and see connections between others. Something I used to make friends with people by befriending their friends. Green was for envy, orange was for hate, and yellow was for deception. I used this information to help alleviate some rather hectic situations in my life, and it's kept me out of trouble more often than not. As a young person in high school, however, the red string was the one that mattered the most to me. Like all teens, I was a bundle of hormones and emotions that were constantly at odds with each other. I wanted a girlfriend, a companion, someone to be with me and make me feel wanted. I wanted a lover who would sate my sexual desires, something I was also very aware of. Like all adolescents, these desires were often at odds, and they sometimes thwarted each other. Girls who wanted to sleep with me were often pushed away by my appearance of being clingy. Girls who wanted a relationship were often pushed away by my supposed want for only one thing. I became frustrated, and some of this was spurred on by the fact that I could see the strings. You see, I only approached girls who presented a connection to me by that tried and true red string. The darker the red, the more they liked you, and I have watched that string grow lighter and lighter again and again before finally falling off as I drive them away with my wearing desires. Sometimes I think the strings actually hurt me, making me confident but also making me sure that I couldn't mess it up. I would stumble into these encounters and ultimately be pushed aside when my behavior or cockiness ultimately drove them away. Until one day, when I woke up to find a heartstring. I've told you about the red strings, but heartstrings are a little different. They were as red as arterial blood, and they only connected people who were meant to be together. Normally, they took time to build, but sometimes you would see two people connected by a heartstring who had yet to meet. When you hear of love at first sight, this is what they're talking about, and they are extremely rare. I woke up one morning, about 2 weeks after my 17th birthday, to find a heartstring leading out of my bedroom. I was confused at first. After the last girl I had clumsily run off with my careless teen advances, she told others at school that I was a creep. Now many female students would no longer talk to me. I hadn't seen a red string in nearly 3 months, so to suddenly wake up with a blood-red string was unthinkable. I had no girlfriend, didn't even have any female friends that would speak to me, and now suddenly I could see this heartstring protruding from my chest and stretching out into the world. It took everything I had to eat some breakfast, get dressed, and shoulder my bag so I could head to school. I just knew it was going to be a great day. I followed the red string on my normal route. I believed it was someone at school, so this seemed the best way to find them. I had no reason to doubt this. School held most of the people my age that I knew. It could be someone new, someone who had been sick and didn't know about the rumors that circulated, or even someone who had found themselves smitten with me despite the rumors. I remember forming a picture of them in my mind, this homunculus becoming an amalgamation of the things I liked in a partner. Green eyes, straight black hair, glasses, a little on the chubby side, an easy smile, and on and on and on. When the string diverted, going into town instead of towards my school, I stopped and looked anxious. The string was heading into the business district, and I could hear the bell ringing nearby, letting me know that I had about 5 minutes to get to class, before I was late. I had been dragging my feet, daydreaming all the way to school, and the deviation was not something I had planned for. Did I go to school and hope the person was also running late, or did I go looking for what could very well be the love of my life? What if they were only in town for a few hours? What if I missed this chance forever because I was too scared to break a rule? As the bell for class echoed out, I turned and headed into town. I was already late. What was a little longer? I followed the string up the street, my tennis shoes slapping against the pavement as I, again, slipped into a daydream about who I was going to meet. Maybe she was a homeschooled girl who was out with her parents. Maybe they were traveling, and our meeting would spark a long-distance relationship that would become something closer later. Maybe, my adolescent mind fantasized, it was an older woman who would be taken with me and begin a secret romance. Not too much older, of course. In my mind, she would be 19 or 20, maybe even 21, and someone who would take me to parties and concerts and buy me beer as we fell into a whirlwind romance. Teens never think these things through, doing most of their thinking with what's below the belt, and my excitement built with every step I took. The string led me through the business district, and when it led me towards the industrial park, I stopped and glanced around. Who would be waiting here for me? Was it take your daughter to work day at some factory? If I got caught here, I would be in big trouble. Hell, I could have been in trouble if the truancy officer had caught me walking the streets during school hours. I looked back towards the school, thinking it might be time to head back. If I left now, I would only be a bit late, only in a little trouble. I might miss first period, but I could still get to my other classes, making up some excuse for what had taken me so long. I looked back at the smoking factory that lay just across the street, shaking my head as I walked towards it. I would feel at the time that this would be an experience too important to miss. I wish now that I had. I might have kept my innocence. I skirted the factory, getting some looks from men with lunch pails and men in ties, but the string didn't lead me there. I walked past a shiny office park, some construction firm or another, but the string led me past that as well. I walked past a concrete plant, a shipping depot, and stopped again as I came even with a long warehouse of unknown purpose. I was looking at a broken and derelict building, that had once been a manufacturer of some kind of computer parts. The windows were broken eyes that stared out onto the sidewalk, and the doors hung open like the waiting mouth of a carnival funhouse. I did not want to go into the building, but that was where my string was leading me. I took one hesitant step after another as I approached the husk. I was inside before I started noticing the drops of blood on the floor. The string was trailing the drops like a dutiful hound, and I felt less and less sure that I wanted to know who or where it was taking me. Who would I find in here? Why would they possibly be the love of my life? Was I meant to save them from something? My mind treated me to some sort of hero fantasy where I could come across my love being menaced by a killer and know just what to do in order to save her. She would have fled him after he cut her, hence the blood, and I would arrive just in time to save her life, but not before I knocked the villain out with a pipe and proved that I was a real man who could protect her. It's funny the gymnastics our brains go through sometimes. The blood drops led to a stairwell that went down into the shadowy underbelly of the building. The blood droplets didn't look too bad, maybe a bloody nose or a slight cut. And I took out my phone then and used the light to follow them. I tried to be quiet, but I knew that my footsteps had to be nearly as loud as my breathing, a mixture of ragged fear and hesitant excitement. When I peeked around the edge of the stairwell, I could see hulking machinery that had probably once kept this place running. Generators, old equipment, broken furniture, they all looked like monsters waiting to jump out and get me. But as I stood shivering in that near darkness, I heard something that reminded me of my purpose. A liquid-filled cough came from the back of the basement. I snuck in, my shoes grinding onto sand and broken glass as I made my way towards them. The basement had little windows at street level, and the light that came in illuminated everything but the darker areas. The soup in between the machines was permeable only with my phone light, and I checked them as I went for hiding beasts waiting to ambush me. I heard a wet, racking cough and sped up a little, not wanting to be too late to save her in my caution. She was waiting for me, and I didn't want to let her down. She was at the end, her body in a beam of sunlight as she lay dying. She was a mess. Her clothes had been ripped and torn, parts of her on display that had certainly been part of my fantasies, though never like this. She had been about my age, 16 or 17, but I didn't know her. She was leaking blood from dozens of wounds on her face and chest, and her arms looked like ripped open Christmas packages as they hung in bloody tatters. She was leaking other things too, and it was pretty clear that killing her hadn't been enough for him. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and confusion as I approached her, and I told her that I wasn't going to hurt her as I took out my phone and dialed 911. As the operator picked up, though, a shadow fell across us, and I suddenly looked up to see someone looking down from the window at street level. He had clearly placed her there so that he could get one more look before leaving, and I saw him in profile now, though the sun made his features hard to tell. He was an adult, or maybe a really big teen, and he was wearing a ball cap and a jumpsuit that zipped up. There was a logo on the jumpsuit, but I didn't have time to read it before he just took off towards wherever he was going. The operator called out to ask if I was there, and I quickly gave her my information and told her where we were and what was happening. I gave her the best description of the guy that I could, and when the girl's hand tried to fumble into mine, I took it and squeezed it reassuringly. I wanted to let her know that she had to hold on, that she would be important to me, and that she had to stay alive because we had so much more to experience together. In my mind, I could already see her recovering as I stayed by her side, the two of us bonding over her trauma. I would be the man who had saved her, and as she healed, I would be there for her. I'd be by her side when they caught the guy, giving her my strength as she sat in court. We'd be married, we'd have children of our own, and we'd protect them against people like that. And one day, we'd grow old together, and... I looked down and saw the string fall apart, the filaments unraveling as she took her last breath and died in that place. I also saw something I had never seen before, something I would see more often than I wanted to after that day. A black string, midnight cord, that seemed to undulate with want, that stretched out the window and to the man who had severed my heartstring. It seemed I had lost my love, but had gained something far more intimate. I didn't know what it meant, but that black string filled me with dread. I was still contemplating it when the police arrived. Part 2. Her name was Adriana. She had been abducted from a neighboring town the day before I found her. He had been taking her to the warehouse, a spot he knew and often dumped bodies at. The cops said, probably while they hoped I wasn't listening, that they had found the bodies of several teenage runaways in that warehouse over the past few years. The fact that they hadn't caught the guy yet really seemed to indicate how seriously they were taking this case. I couldn't help but being a little bit angry that they weren't doing everything they could to bring this guy to justice, especially given how they had treated me. They questioned me pretty thoroughly. They wanted to know what the killer had looked like, what he had been driving, and most of all, how I had just stumbled across a murder scene. I didn't mention the string. They'd have likely had me committed. Instead, I told them that I had seen someone in a jumpsuit pulling a girl into the warehouse. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, before sneaking up on the place and following the blood trail to the basement. I had found her like that when I got to the basement, and that's when the guy had looked in on us. I told them about the jumpsuit with the logo on the breast, but they seemed angry when I told them that the sun had been coming in through the window and it had made his face hard to see. They also yelled at me for not calling emergency services right away. They said they could have arrived in time to save her if I had called them instead of dithering. My parents arrived about that time, and Dad had some very heated questions about why I was being interrogated like this. I was technically a minor, and the cops were clearly trying to sweat it out of me before someone older and wiser arrived to ask what they thought they were doing. What exactly they were trying to get me to say, I don't know. I suspected at the time that they believed I might be the killer, but lack of evidence kind of made that hard to prove at all. The interview wrapped up shortly after that, and Mom went to get the car while Dad said he had to get back to work. "I'm proud of you, champ," he said. "That took a lot of guts. I'll see you at home later, okay? You can tell us all about it if you want to." He left me on the steps of the police station, Mom off getting the car. That's when I was approached by Mrs. Histian. That's when I learned Adriana's name. She was almost sheepishly this older woman who looked so much like her daughter. She looked overwhelmed, and who could blame her? She had just lost her daughter in the worst way possible. It was clear, though, that she had stayed for a purpose, and I became a little nervous as she shuffled towards me. She had a heartstring trailing from her, as well as a whole network of blue strings, and she lacked the hate and jealousy that I saw so often in high school. She was loved, well-liked, but the purple caterpillar that inched around her like a leech worried me. Another new color, and I had no more clue what it meant than the black cord I could see moving off into the city. Excuse me, I was just wondering if you were the one who was with my Adriana at the end? She asked, her words sounding like she was afraid she might offend me. Yes, ma'am, I said, not sure what to expect next. Did she think Adriana and I had been friends? Did she suspect that I was actually her killer? I felt my whole body tense like a live wire when she hugged me. I was expecting to feel a knife, hear a gunshot, but instead I was just wrapped in the warm embrace of this woman I would never get to meet properly now. This could have been my future mother-in-law. This could have been the mistrustful woman who kept an eye on us as we hung out at her house. This could have been the grandmother of my future children, but now she would be nothing but a thankful stranger, stuck wallowing in her own grief as I would wallow in mine. Thank you, she whispered hoarsely. We might have never found her if it hadn't been for you. She sobbed a little as she tried to get control of herself. I'm glad that the last face my daughter saw wasn't her killer's. I'm glad that she had someone to comfort her in her final moments. I saw my mom pull up, her eyebrows raising as she got out to see what was going on. Adriana's mother disentangled herself from me, her eyes leaking as she tried to explain herself to my mother. It didn't take much. My mother is kind of a marshmallow, and it wasn't any time before the two of them were hugging and crying, my mother telling her how sorry she was for her loss. Then we let her get on with her life, saying our goodbyes. Watching her drive away was like watching a string fall apart that I'd never known I had. I spent the next few days just kind of moping, thinking, wondering what to do now. My parents didn't push. They could clearly see I was struggling with this and probably felt it best to give me my space. I had witnessed something awful, stood in the presence of someone awful, and they thought I was just having trouble with it all as my mind made sense of it. That wasn't really it at all. I was mourning. I was mourning for this girl that I had never actually known. I had seen the string. She would have been important to me, perhaps even the love of my life, and I felt a hollow place inside me now that she was gone. Would there be another heartstring for me? Would I ever love again? I found Adriana's body on Wednesday, and I let myself grieve until Sunday night. When I showed up at the breakfast table Monday morning, dressed for school, both my parents seemed surprised. I wasn't, though. On Sunday, I had come to a place where I realized I had two options. I could go on grieving for someone I had never actually known, or I could go on with my life and try to make something of it. 17 was a little early to just give myself over to depression, and the more I mourned for Adriana, the sillier I felt about it. I had no fond memories to look back on, no fights to regret, no dates to feel giddy about, and no little moments to reflect on and smile throughout the day. I couldn't, in good faith, throw my life away for someone that I only knew could have been important to me. I was 17. I had my whole life ahead of me. Dad dropped me off that day, telling me that if anything happened, or if it all became too much somehow, I could call him or Mom, and they would come to get me. I think it's pretty brave that you're ready to step back into the real world so soon, but take it slow, okay? I thanked him and stepped out into something unexpected. As I previously told you, I was a bit of a social pariah at school. Lisa Carmichael, the last girl I had really been serious about, had told the school that I was a creep who didn't respect women. I can honestly say that she wasn't wrong. In my mind, I blamed it on a miscommunication, on misunderstood signals. But at the end of the day, I had tried to go too fast. I had been focused on my needs, and hadn't bothered to listen to a word she had said all night. When she had clearly told me to slow down as we sat in the back seat of my dad's car after our date, I had tried to push it farther, and had ended up with a slap to the face and a departing view of her fleeing skirt. I had deserved the reputation, and had expected to come right back to it. I was greeted instead with whispers and pointed fingers as I walked towards the library, where I usually met my friends. Strings seemed to attach themselves to me as well, hesitant blues or pulsing yellows, even a few lighter red strings that throbbed with an almost hopeful heartbeat. I tried to ignore this, not sure what to make of this sudden attention, but it was getting harder and harder to deny that something had shifted. Some of them had even started following me, and when I dipped into the library, I was a little happy to have a door between them and me. Mark and Daniel seemed legitimately surprised to see me when I arrived at our usual table. I guess I couldn't blame them. I hadn't taken a visitor or a phone call or so much as logged on to my computer in 5 days. They likely thought I was in the hospital or something, and seeing me now was a bit of a shock. Daniel exuded his usual blue string, but from Mark, I was getting a blue and yellow mixture that was almost neon as it pulsed. "Dude, where the hell have you been?" Mark asked, pushing out a chair as a nearby librarian shushed him. "Sorry, guys," I said, pitching my voice low. "I was kind of in a bad place after, you know." "I can imagine," said Daniel. Mark shook his head before he could be derailed, though. "The whole school has been talking about you. You're a legend, man. The stories range from you finding a dead body to saving a girl's life. The rumors about you being a creep are dead. I'm pretty sure most of the girls at school would line up for a chance at you." That took me by surprise. "But I didn't save anyone. I just found a body and stayed with her while she... I could see her there sometimes when I thought about it. She leaned against the brick wall, her clothes shredded, her blood puddling around her, her eyes filled with fear and confusion as she wondered what would happen now that this new player had entered the game. I could still feel the heat draining from her fingers, her strength dwindling as her life left her, and the boneless way her hand slid out of mine. I could still see the string, my tried and true string, fraying and falling apart like cheap yarn. I could still see that bastard in the jumpsuit as he looked down on us, and in my memory, his black silhouette was broken by a wide, cartoonish smile. "Well, whatever happened," Mark said, rolling right along, "you should capitalize on this. Gabe is having a party on Friday. You should go. It'll be a great way to get past that stuff with Lisa and maybe meet someone new." At the time, I gave him a non-committal answer, not really sure I wanted to go. Mark hadn't been exaggerating, though. People approached me all week, some of them teachers, to tell me how brave I had been or apologize for how they had treated me. Lisa even attempted to apologize, but I cut her off and told her she had nothing to apologize for. I had been a creep, and the situation had made me reflect on some of my behaviors. She did say she was sorry for spreading it around the school, and it seemed like I was back on even footing with most of the student body. I began to see a spiderweb of hopeful red strings, blue strings, and even a few yellows from some of my peers. The strings are rarely one color, just as emotions are a spectrum. So the strings I collected were almost always a confusing mishmash of hues. The exception seemed to be the black string. No matter what, No matter how many I've seen over time, they always stay black. I had never been this connected, this popular before in my life, and as Friday grew closer, I decided that I would go to this party. I'm glad I did in retrospect. It gave me a lot to think about. The party at Gabe's house was in full swing when I arrived. His parents were out of town for the weekend, and he was taking full advantage of their absence. It was the usual setup. There were refreshments in the kitchen, music and lounging in the living room, and the upstairs was reserved strictly for couples. Most everyone from the 12th and 11th grades was there, and even a few underclassmen were mingling. The place looked like a rave as strings were connected and severed and connected anew with such rapidity that it made my eyes hurt. Alcohol seems to complicate matters when dealing with the strings. It often made red strings pop in and out of existence at will, and some couples went upstairs connected by red, only to come down connected by nothing, or maybe even the orange of hatred. I quickly found a drink and found a corner, trying not to be overwhelmed by the crowd and the light show. People came up to talk, but they seemed to understand my want for space. They would congratulate me on being so brave, ask how I was doing, and then usually flit back into the mob as I kept my answers short and non-committal. I suddenly felt a bump on my hip and turned to find that Lisa had snuck up on me. "Hey, I didn't expect to see you here." I took a sip, letting her lean with me as we surveyed the party. "Yeah, well, Mark made it sound like it was practically mandatory that I show up." Lisa snorted. "He's out back trying to play beer pong. He's not very good at it, and it keeps getting worse the longer he plays. Hey, do you—" She bit her lip and looked nervous. "Do you mind if I stay here with you for a minute?" She seemed tense, something I almost mistook for shyness, but she kept looking back out at the crowd in that way that trapped animals often do. That was when I noticed it. The presence of all those strings had made me miss them, but there was suddenly a second black string. One was mine, but one connected Lisa to someone at the party. I still didn't understand what the black string was, but I had seen a few others since Adriana's murder. I had seen a woman and someone, supposedly her husband, connected by a black string. They had been in the grocery store, and though she had been hanging on his every word, I got the feeling that it was all an act. Her smiles never reached her eyes, and sometimes her face became almost predatory when he looked away. I felt like maybe she hated him, but the string reflected only the deep, pulsing black that I didn't have an emotion for yet. The others I had seen just stretched off into the world, the holders just waiting for the opportunity to reel them in and do whatever it was they meant to do. And now, it seemed, Lisa had found a black string. "What's wrong?" I asked, scanning the crowd to try to find the other end of her string. "Is someone after you?" She looked nervous again. "After me? What gave you that idea?" "Lisa," I said, maybe a little sharper than I intended to. "Is someone bothering you? You seem really tense." Lisa looked away. She seemed to be deciding whether to tell me or not. I followed the string into the sea of pulsating lights, and I thought I caught sight of the man at the end of hers. Someone who was mingling with the people at the party, someone whose height made them stand out a bit. Everyone else seemed to have their mating plumage on display, looking their best so they could find a partner to go upstairs with. But this guy didn't seem interested in any of that. I would see a flash of old jeans, a ripped hoodie, mud-caked boots, and then he would be back amongst the thrum of partygoers, lost in the crowd. "He's friends with Travis, my brother," Lisa started, my attention was drawn back to her. He's sold me weed a few times, and we hooked up once when I didn't have enough money. We hooked up a few times, actually. But I cut it off with him. I told him never to come near me again, but he saw me, and he's been trying to talk to me. I just keep avoiding him, but that was the moment that he finally stepped out of the crowd, and I got a good look at him. The string connected the two of them at the navel, and from under his hood, it appeared he had eyes only for her. She seemed to see him noticing her and stopped talking. He had taken a step towards us when Mark suddenly staggered in front of me, grinning. "You made it," he said, throwing an arm around me. "Come on, there's someone I want you to meet." He reeked of booze and slurred his words as he led me into the kitchen. I looked back at Lisa as he steered me away. She had tried to follow us, but the hooded man stepped in front of her and blocked her from view. I tried to break away from Mark, but he had dragged me into the kitchen, where a chorus of voices rolled over me like a wave, and the swinging kitchen door blocked the living room from sight. The kitchen was full of people in a similar state to Mark. They took my sudden appearance as an invitation to bombard me with questions. They called me a hero. They wanted to know about the crime scene. They wanted to know about the girl. They wanted to know what I had seen. They wanted to know about the killer, and on and on and on. Their drunken questions kept spinning around me like a cloud of bees, and between their questions and the constant pulse of their strings, I was becoming overwhelmed. I had experienced problems with anxiety before, but as they all pressed in, I began to sweat, thinking of Adriana and the shadowy man, and all the strings and all the colors, and feeling my head spin like a merry-go-round. I felt sick, their too sweet breath making a miasma around me, as I excused myself and fled for the door. I felt like I might throw up, and I didn't want to do it in front of a crowd. Mark moved to intercept me. "What's wrong, dude?" he trumpeted, slurring and laughing as I ran. "Can't hold your liquor?" he said, laughing, believing I'd had too much to drink. I felt the cool air on my face, the house party loud enough to rattle the windows as I tried not to paint Gabe's house in my vomit. That was when I heard a familiar voice. "Let go of me! Let go! I'm not going with you!" I looked around the corner of the house, my legs wobbling as my stomach heaved, and that's when I saw them. The man in the hoodie was dragging Lisa towards his car, Lisa fighting him every step of the way. She was shouting, trying to raise attention from somewhere, but her kidnapper was having none of it. He had a death grip on her wrist and used his size to his advantage. I stepped towards them, but felt my legs wobble, the anxiety buzzing inside me. It hadn't been like this last time. I was just a lovesick kid following a string. I was no hero. I was just at the wrong place at the right time. I clung to the house as Lisa tried to pull away, not sure I had the strength to do what needed to be done. "So, you really are a coward then?" I would hear that voice throughout my life, and though I had never heard her speak, I knew it was Adriana. "You can save her like you couldn't save me. Doesn't she deserve the life I won't have?" That was when Lisa pulled free suddenly, jerking her arm out of his grip and shouting for him to leave her alone. That was when he pulled the knife out of his jacket pocket. "I told you, Lisa, if I can't have you, then no one can." The black string between them pulsed and throbbed as they stood staring at each other. It was growing excited as the moment of its completion approached, and that was when I realized what the string was for. It connected them, drew them together, but its purpose was to ultimately be broken. It would break when he took her life. It would break when he severed the connection. The man had no intention of loving her. He just wanted to make sure that no one else would. I ran at him, the moment of his completion seeming to dull his senses. When I hit him around the waist, tackling him against a nearby car, the knife slipped out of his hand. I told Lisa to call the police, and she nodded as she ran towards the house. As she left, the black string began to fray between them, disappearing as the moment of the kill passed. He struggled a little, cursing at me through a mouthful of wet cotton. He was larger than me and probably could have thrown me off if he really wanted to, but he'd hit his head when I tackled him and seemed to be kind of out of it. I saw flashing lights and heard sirens coming up the road, followed by the shouts of partygoers and the general exodus of Gabe's guests. Party was over, it appeared. They started to cuff me after separating us, but Lisa told them that it was the guy in the hoodie before they got too far along. He had been trying to stumble off in the confusion, but they got him before he could get too far. They actually thanked me for my help, and Lisa threw a big hug around me as they took our statements. "I'd be dead if it wasn't for you." I nodded, telling her it had been nothing. Looking down, it was only my black string now, coursing off into God knew where. I wondered how long it would be before whoever it was on the other end, the man who had killed Adriana, came to settle our score.